available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Ken.
Great, thank you, Carol. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks, James, as well for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about something that I've had a lot of passion about. It's threat hunting. Over the last few years, I've actually led a number of different workshops. Actually, I've gone in and I've trained Fortune 100 companies around how to develop and build threat hunting programs. And through that process, I've actually learned quite a bit. One is that a lot of times folks get a little scared about actually rolling out a threat hunting program. They start to realize that there are actually a lot of data sources and things that they didn't plan on bringing in. They don't have it available in their SIM. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about those data sources, how to bring those in, and how to build some of these types of programs without having to break the bank. I thought we'd give just a quick overview of ourselves here. See if I can, there you go. James, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thanks, Ken. My name is James Schweitzer. Again, I'm really excited. This is a passion of mine, trying to help everyone understand the tools that are available in the open source in order to hunt and really root out threat actors. I've been with Corelight for a couple of years, spent a decade with the MITRE Corporation, working with multiple U.S. government agencies, and I'm excited to share what I've learned with everyone.
Awesome, great. And I've really loved working with Bro, over the last few years. So working as a partner with Corelight's been really great. I do a lot of workshops and we focus a lot on endpoint, but I've really started to see the value in network data as well. We'll talk a lot about that of why it's important to look at both endpoint as well as on the network, especially when you start to look at maybe larger, more advanced adversaries that are targeting your organization. You don't want to just mitigate one threat. You want to be able to identify all the different techniques that are being used. From that, you're able to better identify who's targeting your organization as well, and able to tell a larger story versus, hey, we blocked 100 threats today. That doesn't really tell executive management a lot. If you're able to say, hey, we actually blocked this one particular adversary, these are the tools and techniques that they used, here's how they got past our defenses, this is the type of data they were after. I find that a lot of times when you're able to have those kind of conversations with leaders, it actually tends to free up a lot more budget because you're actually able to tell those stories and you're actually able to align mitigating risk with some of the business objectives of the organization. So one thing that a lot of people ask is, what exactly is threat hunting? And really, it's the idea that, all this money that we've actually invested in our environment, all those expensive firewalls, all those expensive SIMs, all the time we've actually spent in our boundary defenses and our automated detection rules, they're going to fail. And that's a really difficult thing for a lot of organizations to come to terms with. The fact that they've actually invested all this money and they're, then you go and you say, hey, we want to build a threat hunting program to catch the things we miss. A lot of leaders may say, what the heck? We've already put all this money into it. What are you saying that this isn't going to work? Well, we need to realize that our adversaries are generally more sophisticated. They have a lot of ways of getting inside the organization, everything from phishing campaigns, social media, you name it. Not just your zero-day vulnerabilities. There's always going to be a way inside the network. So that's sort of the first thing, is to realize that we do have that problem, is that eventually our boundary defenses are going to fail. So it just accepts the evil exists in our environment, and it's our job actually as hunters to go about and find that evil in our environment. So I kind of like this, it's we trace the phone call from inside the house. So this is where we can't necessarily always rely on our firewall alerts or our IDS alerts and things like that. We have to actually be able to, if I was an adversary, what would I do to actually go undetected in my own environment? And sometimes that can actually require taking on the mindset of an attacker, right? So, actually a lot of folks that are hunters do have some sort of offensive security training, whether it's the CEH or if you want to go hardcore and do the OSCP, having those kind of skill sets within your team is going to be really critical to help sort of plan out, once you've got your tools in place to do the detection, maybe you actually want to start firing off some threats, maybe actually run some malware on systems. And we'll talk about some ways you can actually do that to test some of your telemetry. So who's a threat hunter? Usually I find it's a senior analyst, someone that's actually been out there. They've actually seen some shit, right? So actually gone out there and they've actually worked some incidents. They understand some of the alerts. They understand the telemetry. They understand the data that they're actually working with. Finding that they usually have strong data analytics skills. Usually they have some capability to be able to do regular expressions. They'll have some experience with malware analysis as well. Ideally, as I mentioned before, it's good to have some background in offensive security. I don't think you need to be a full-on, pen tester, recovering hacker or anything like that. But understanding some of the tools and techniques that are being used, I think is really important. And there's so many classes and resources that are available that teach these types of things that, I think nowadays, it's sort of expected that we do have some of those skill sets. Always be willing to experiment with new detection patterns. I think I'm a big fan of Chris Sanders. He offers a lot of training for security analysts from networkdefense.io. But he always talks about some of the biases that we have when we're actually doing hunting, and how that actually can have an impact on how we actually identify threats or how we may be blind to threats as well. Having a good understanding of your organization's IT structure is critical. Knowing what you're trying to protect, and then a good understanding of network and endpoint data sources as well. And James, did you have anything to add?
No, I think that's a great overview. The one piece I would add is really the analyst, if they've got curiosity, they kind of want to pull on that thread. Because if you think back, I always think back to Clifford Stoll's book, The Cuckoo's Egg, to understand and say, what started that? It was what started an investigation that led to a gentleman who had penetrated, multiple government computers and servers, was a small accounting error. It was something to say, well, what is it and why is that? They need to have that curiosity and that drive to use the analytic skills to go through and understand kind of what's the root cause, not really understand just a symptom.
That's a great point. Yeah, I've also noticed too, like I'm seeing a lot of people experimenting a lot more with using machine learning to do anomaly detection, like specifically unsupervised machine learning, baselining behavior and things like that. So it's there's a lot more technologies are out there. It's no longer just your boundary defenses either. I'm seeing a lot of folks that are bringing in unstructured data. They're bringing in data from like Twitter for some of their security and hunting capabilities. So I think there's a lot more data sources that people have available to them, as well as some of the tools. Let's see, it's a little too fast. So I really like this. This was actually from Matt Swan. A lot of folks are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So he actually came up with this as sort of the hierarchy of incident response needs. And I think it's really important to talk about. There's a lot of times folks will say, hey, I want to start hunting. And I've gone into some of these organizations and I find that, the only data sources they have available are basically their firewall and maybe some Windows event logs. So they really don't have the visibility or the telemetry to actually be able to identify some of these threats. And so I tend to work with those companies and those organizations on adding some additional data sources so they do have that visibility, whether it's at the network level or if it's the endpoint. But it's really important for them to kind of follow this. Like you don't want to just, hey, I'm just going to go out and start hunting when you don't have some of the basic security fundamentals covered. So, the first thing is going to be the inventory. That's going to be critical. You really need to know what you're protecting. And then from there, you can start to gather the telemetry. And then as you move up, you'll see that hunt is one of the top things of this tier. So you need to be able to do these, have these tools and mechanisms in place, having automated detection. You really need to do the basic